Alldus podcast is brought to you by Alldus International, supplying your expert AI and digital transformation staffing needs across the US and Europe. Today, you are listening to our AI in Action series, where leading minds in AI from across the world share their story, success, and advice. AI in Action cuts through the hype and explores the true impact of artificial intelligence in our world today.
Welcome to the AI podcast. Today's guest, I'm joined by Sumeet Vaidya at Crafting. Sumeet, thanks for taking the time, man. Really appreciate it.
Of course. Really excited to be on, and thanks for inviting me.
Very welcome. So for those who don't know anything about Crafting or even Sumeet, could you tell us a little bit more about your journey so far?
So, quick background on myself. After grad school for being a software engineer, when things were a little interesting in the market, I thought I was going to be an infrastructure engineer, but then got pulled to Facebook in 2011 when it was still a private company. Everyone called it MySpace 2.0, and I was just drawn by the raw talent and intelligence of the people there, but also the hunger they had, and I think that's kind of carried through my career. So I was there for about 4 years, went to Uber for a while as well, worked on everything from international growth to enterprise integrations with the Hertzes of the world to micromobility. I then went to Discord, led a variety of teams while I was there. And a couple of years ago when I was leaving Discord, I was getting an itch to do something a bit different. And throughout my career, there have always been large periods of time where I didn't have a direct product counterpart, there wasn't a clear business owner, and I was drawn to kind of taking ownership of that. For me, at the end of the day, we all have jobs in service of the company's vision and goal. And to me, that was the ultimate measure of success for myself, for my team, for everybody I worked with. And being a startup founder is very intense and can be very stressful. But for me, the big thing was I wanted that risk. I wanted that ability to call my shot, essentially, and found the right set of problems I really wanted to work on and just haven't looked back.
Brilliant. And then obviously, look, you turned into a founder then at Crafting, and I know you guys are building sort of AI agents to write code, validate, and ship to production like senior engineers. So exactly how did that come about? Why solve that problem?
We didn't set out to solve that problem initially. When I met my co-founder, there was a common problem that had been bothering both of us. Just the developer experience is very high variance across the industry. At Facebook, I had best-in-class tooling. My co-founder was he was on the Kubernetes team at Google for a while. He was at VMware for a while, and so he had great tooling as well. But when we look at the rest of the industry, some companies just have atrocious tooling. Some companies don't know what good tooling looks like. And for me personally, giving engineers the ability to just build, ship, test, and iterate really quickly was the difference between the hungriest, fastest moving teams at Facebook that still had a really high bar, and other teams I've seen where teams just kind of struggle and says, well, I guess I'll ship it and we'll see if it works once it's live for the users, which killed my soul as an eng leader, but I couldn't say anything because we didn't really have any other options, right? So we set out to build that. We had some pretty solid traction with pretty meaningful companies, like Fair, Verkada, Instabase, and a few others. But about a year ago, we saw things shifting. AI agents were getting much better, and it was only a matter of time until people trusted them more. A year ago, if you said, yeah, I have 5 different agents running in parallel simultaneously, just shipping stuff, everyone would look at you like you're crazy. What are you doing? How do you trust that stuff, right? But we said eventually that's going to be solved. And we realized that the future of engineering organizations actually looks like engineers and agents working together. We've already solved a lot of these problems for engineers in terms of access to the things and infrastructure they need to work effectively. And we realized that agents need the same thing, especially at large-scale enterprise organizations. We had solved this for engineers. Very few other people did in a scalable way. We can solve it for agents too. And so probably around February of this year, we kind of rebooted the company, and we still support all the stuff we did before, but now it's accessible for agents. So our customers can bring their own agents, bring their own infrastructure, and we essentially empower them to deliver on the promise of AI that a lot of people are struggling with realizing today.
It is such a big issue even today, right? It's not. We've got all these different tools out there, Claude Code, Cursor, and definitely the next evolution, right? Is to what more can it do, right? But to repurpose is such a big gamble, right? You had just gone, oh yeah, like we're starting to get customers, right? We think we found market fit, and then boom, no, let's change it. So, what prompted that decision? Was there something specific that was like the trigger, or?
My co-founder and I are both engineers by trade, right? So we use these tools. We don't hear about hype from other people. We don't read blog posts about what, Composer 2.5 or Codex 5.5 or whatever can do. We use it ourselves and we could see what was happening. I guess a couple other things too is I I led the engineering team building out consumer facing AI products at Discord. So I've been deep in this space for a while. And a year ago, we just said, this is where the industry is going. And we want to build a company that is sustainable, that supports our customers for 5, 10, or more years, right? We want this to be something that is truly meaningful and impactful for a lot of people. So we're not going to look at what's the current bottleneck. Oh, people need sandboxes. Let's just focus on sandbox. Oh, people need validation. Let's just build testing agents. Like, no. What does the industry look like 2, 3, 5 years from now, or even beyond? I think it's hard to go beyond 3 years at this point, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it really came down to, where do we see things going? And you kind of alluded to this, but it was really hard. We went to all of our existing customers and said, hey, if we made all this accessible for coding agents, would you want to use it? And almost every single one of them said, this is nonsense. Why do I need that? This was a year ago when people said, why do I need a remote execution environment? I don't need a sandbox. And now you have OpenAI just announced that they're acquiring Ono, right? Anthropic's partnership with all these sandbox providers. So clearly there's something there, but a year ago, people thought it was ludicrous. One of our customers, I actually want to shout out Fair, they have been very, very ahead of the curve in this regard. And they said, yeah, we'd be interested in playing around with some of this stuff. And a few folks gave us that validation that there was at least interest, but yeah, we kind of bet on this is where we think things are going. And if you're going to be a startup founder, you can't shy away from that. It was this moment of, if we're wrong, or even if we're right, but it takes 2, 3, or 4 years for people to get there, we've lost out on a ton of momentum, and we've kind of, short-circuited our path to success as a company, right?
Yeah.
But you just need to have that conviction and belief and just say, this is where things are going. If I'm wrong, things will fail, and that's on me. But if we're right, we succeed. And that kind of thinking and that level of stakes never really scared me. It's just, yeah, this is what you need to do if you want to be a founder.
Yeah. Embrace that chaos.
Very much so.
Awesome. I know you, when we spoke before, you had just recently traveled to Singapore. So it's cool to see, a startup also competing for international business, right? So early. Tell us more about this sort of trip, and what are some of the future plans that you guys have for the business?
Absolutely. So we design crafting to be enterprise first. I think there's a lot of great tools that are out there that help individual engineers be more productive. But if you have a few hundred, a few thousand, or even 10,000 engineers, things kind of don't scale from one engineer to that amount. And we have pretty strong conviction that for agents, that's going to be true as well. If you're running one agent to help you with your contracts or customer support or writing PRs, like, it's fine. But if you're an organization with 2,000 or 3,000 agents in a large swarm doing a variety of tasks, you need infrastructure, you need guardrails that can actually support that. And so we design crafting around all of that. This might be a slightly controversial take, but I think that true enterprise organizations in the US are a bit slower and might be at risk of falling behind other regions of the world when it comes to modernizing infrastructure and figuring out how to use AI effectively at scale, right? I think we've seen this with Uber CTO talking about this a few weeks ago. They've hit their token limit. Everyone's still focused on they need cloud sandboxes and they need to maximize tokens. Now they're worried about cost. But that's not a forward-looking view of how should this look in a year or two. And what we've actually seen, there was outreach from Singapore, where there are organizations that are proactively investing in the future of their business and their infrastructure longer term. And so I think there was actually a pretty interesting fit where we're still working closely with a lot of customers here. We have pilots up and running. We have new customers coming on board in the US. But internationally, some of the bigger players are actually very, very interested in trying to leapfrog the competition, to be honest, by modernizing their tech stack and really, really adopting AI at scale specifically, as opposed to just giving every single engineer a Claude API key or an OpenAI API key. So the trip to Singapore was interesting. There were a few events that I hosted, both for large enterprise organizations and for the local startup community. But I was also chatting with, you know, some of the folks in the regional government that manage technology for the region, as well as some other interesting institutions. And those conversations are actually accelerating, which is exciting. Similarly, I went to Japan to speak at a conference earlier in the year, and a few organizations out there are very, very keen on working with us. Now, granted, from an enterprise standpoint, these are longer sales cycles, but it's really interesting to see how hungry enterprise organizations around the world are to partner with Silicon Valley and modernize their tooling, but they're struggling because so few companies are actually enterprise ready. So transparently, from a business standpoint, we're one of the few ones who are ready. Why not capitalize on that?
Absolutely. Yeah, who better, right? If when you look at some of the AI hotspots around the world, Japan and Singapore always kind of jump out as sort of key locations when we look at sort of Asia's hotspots. So, not surprised about that. But it's interesting to hear that context around the enterprise companies actually, and there being companies that are basically wanting to leapfrog their competitors, right? Which I suppose in this world, it's the marginal gains, right? It's like when you reach the top and you're performing at it like an athlete performing at an elite level, it's always the small things that make a difference, and being able to, completely like adopt AI properly and have a safe infrastructure that supports it is, yeah, sets them up for the next 5 to 10 years. Obviously we can't look too far ahead, like you said, with the evolution of AI. So that's fascinating. So what do you think are some of the bigger challenges then of even what you guys face as a company when actually trying to build and deliver this? What are the challenges you see in this area?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because we're building infrastructure to make these agents better, and we're also using them too. So the problems we run into kind of inform our roadmap to a certain extent, but also validate what we've done. One of the biggest challenges is that AI agents are really only as good as the material they're trained on. And there is a large corpus of data on just free-form English text, on public front-end repositories of TypeScript and JavaScript, right? There's not as massive of a data set on custom cloud infrastructure, right? And so, we work with all the major cloud providers, we deploy in our customers' environments, we integrate all of this other stuff across their tech stack, and we build these custom solutions for them. Agents struggle with a lot of that out of the box. So you can pick your favorite model, right? Opus 4.8, Codex 5.5 High, whatever, and throw it at these problems. They will hallucinate. They will make up things around how Oracle Cloud's API works, or how to do safe failover over to AWS or GCP or Azure, right? And so we can't blindly trust these agents. No matter how much context you give, no matter how much you link to the docs, candidly, it's just fancy autocomplete, right? What we have seen, though, that's been really interesting is if you give these agents ways to act like engineers, it fundamentally changes things, right? So for engineers, we didn't say, write your code and then ship it. We said, write your code, make sure you run those unit tests, make sure you do a play test with your team, demo it to everyone, walk through it together, right? Even with our engineering teams 10, 15, 20 years ago, you still required people to go through and actually do things, right? And so with agents, you need something similar. It's not enough just to have a front end website where people can just look at things or agents can just look at things. You need to have these agents actually able to make real calls, test real things. And once we started hooking those in, the capabilities of these best models just skyrocketed. And so the big challenge here is, how do you give your agents the capabilities they need to create these loops? I think this actually goes back to something that's trending today where everyone says, don't write code, write loops. And it's like, there's this nice little diagram of tell an agent what to do, agent tries it out, agent checks its work, and then loops. And I'm like, this checking its work part is doing so much heavy lifting that we're glossing over. Yeah. How do you let these agents actually act like people in terms of our expectations for them? Either go run the product and test it out, or go get feedback from somebody on this, right? Whether it's human in the loop or validating things some other way. And so I think the big challenge is giving models capabilities more so than what does your harness look like? Which model are you really using, right? I think we've actually solved this just transparently because this has been a pain point for us, but we think it unlocks a ton. But we think this is where we'll see a difference between companies that are very successful and companies that will struggle with AI over the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
Will they actually invest in the right tooling and infrastructure to give these agents the capabilities they need? Or are they going to get caught up in hype cycles around, okay, now let's optimize token spend. Now let's optimize this sandbox. Now let's optimize production monitoring. That's going to feel like a bunch of band-aids applied to the most urgent paper cut, as opposed to, oh, this person literally broke a bone. Let's just fix that instead, right?
Right. That makes sense. So, and when we talk about that, like the do the code, do the unit test, right, and breaking it down that granular into sort of, I guess, a process and a workflow. So is it more the companies that struggle because they don't actually have a very detailed breakdown workflow of how their engineers build and produce outputs, or what typically hits that?
I think that a lot of engineering leaders are between a rock and a hard place. I think that earlier this year, we saw a lot of board mandates and CEOs pushing, saying, maximize AI usage. And we're starting to see this retraction. I think it's going to get over-indexed in that direction. But when everybody was token maxing, talking about all this stuff, we host community dinners with VPs of engineering from Fortune 500 companies, from Global 2000 companies, right? And pretty consistently with customers, with friends I know in the space, at our community dinners, we were hearing people 3 months ago saying, yeah, this is going to burn us later this year, but this is what the execs want. This is what the board wants. So we're going to do it. We're going to maximize token spend, and then it's going to be a mess, and we'll clean it up in H2. And that sucks. That hurts to hear, right? Where it's like you have these great engineering leaders who know how to take a more sober approach to investing in infrastructure. But I think a lot of non-engineers are getting caught up in the hype. And so this is actually another thought that I had. As an engineering leader, you need to kind of rein in your team all the time, right? Engineers have so many shiny new tools they can use. Whether it's the latest terminal emulator, the latest IDE they could use, the latest language they could use, there's always something they want to tinker with. And you want to encourage that, right? And I think this was actually the basis of Google's 20% time. You want to give your engineers space to tinker, to iterate, to stay on top of the latest stuff, but not too much time where it's distracting from the core business needs. I think every non-engineer is now learning this because every non-engineer now says, oh, there's all these shiny tools. I could do all these things, but the promise exceeds the amount of work you need to do to actually realize that promise. And so as a result, you've got these engineering leaders who are kind of just stuck, right? Where they want to do things in a more rational way. They're getting a lot of this pressure. And so I empathize for them. I think the engineering leaders who will be able to get their CEOs on board, or this might be feedback for some of the CEOs and founders, folks who can take a step back and say, okay, let's not get caught up in the hype. Let's figure out how we want to invest in this and then take it step by step. We'll be the ones who are successful. And that might be you need the right people to lead those initiatives, right? It might be you need to carve out space. It might be, hey, let's actually pull back on how much people are using AI across the tech stack and say, we know it's working for these cases. Let's just focus on that. And then have a separate team that's more focused on, okay, what other use cases make sense? Or it could be having a real conversation of what can you build in-house versus what can you buy? I think it's going to be a combination for larger organizations, but there's some companies that are just buying everything and that's going to just destroy their budgets. There's some companies that are trying to build everything in-house and it's going to take them 3 years to get something workable. So there's no easy, pithy one-line answer of here's how you need to do it. I think it's more of a mindset of, are the right leaders thinking about things in a sane, not even long-term, mid-term lens, instead of just chasing the current trend?
Yeah, definitely. God, I can only imagine what the technical debt's going to be for some of these companies in the next 12 to 18 months.
I worry for them, man. I go to them and I'm just like, hey, it's going to be a pain. We can give you a large portion of this within 2 weeks and we'll run in your cloud. But if you really want to do this yourself, I'll hit you up in 6 months when things are not looking good.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Like, so much, so many nuggets here. Last kind of nugget then for me, what is, if you were to give advice to somebody thinking about being a founder or an engineer, maybe wondering, where's all this going? What sort of advice would you give today?
I have two very different sets of advice for those folks. I'll start with the engineer first, because I think there's a lot of anxiety around engineering. There's a lot of people who are worried about what engineering will look like, and I think compensation is this big question, job stability is this big question. I'll be very honest with people. When I was studying software engineering in undergrad and grad school, I thought I wasn't going to make much money. I thought that the job market was going to be saturated and was wondering who knows what'll really happen over here. And it worked out. I've been very, very lucky and very, very grateful. But the people who've done best as engineers are the people who are engineers because they want to build things. And no matter what happens with AI, there will always be people who need to build things. There will be a need to build the infrastructure and core products that are required for businesses to be successful. And that's not going to go away. It may change dramatically. Whether you're writing code or you're orchestrating agents or you're doing a lot of planning doesn't really change the fact that somebody needs to figure out how do all these pieces fit together. And if instead you're focused on outcomes, whether it's for the business or your team or an idea you have, that is engineering and that won't go away. So it really just comes down to focus on those outcomes, focus on building things. As long as you do that, you will know what it takes to be a good engineer. And I have seen kids out of college who've been looking for jobs for 4 to 6 months. They've had to relearn how to build things 3 or 4 times in that time span, which sucks and is incredibly painful. But then when they do land a job, they're the first one to say, hey, why are you doing things this way? You can use agents to do this part of it. You can do this instead and make it way more effective, and that frees you up to actually focus on some other stuff. That critical thinking is huge. And so for a lot of the aspiring engineers, focus on the output. Focus on the end goal as opposed to how you're doing it. Don't get caught up in, oh, I want to write code, but I can't write code. This agent write code. Great. Have that agent write your API. Figure out what should the agent even do, whether you call it judgment, taste, or something else. That's not going to go away. The second for an aspiring founder, I will say, know what motivates you. I think there's some founders who just like the idea of being a founder. There's some people who do it because they're frustrated because of a gap in the industry. There's a variety of reasons for it, right? But figure out, is it the agency that drives you? Is it the problem you're trying to solve? Is it, candidly, proving somebody wrong? I know some founders who are incredibly spite-driven and they're very effective at what they do. And so many founders I talk to don't know what it is that makes them tick until a year or two into their journey. And then they realize, oh, here's how I need to structure my life so that I can get the most out of what I'm doing and be the best founder I can be. I think there's a certain amount of self-awareness that it's easier to get the more time you spend in your career because you've seen what worked and what hasn't, and you've screwed up enough to say, okay, I should probably do things in this way. But I think if you're earlier in your career and you want to be a founder, take a little bit of time to reflect and figure out what really motivates you, and it may change, but be honest with yourself about why you're doing it, and that will help you stay motivated and get through those really hard moments.
Yeah, great advice. Great advice. Awesome, Sumeet. Look, thanks a million for taking time. I really appreciate it. And if anyone wants to reach out, they can check out Crafting. What's the plug-in for them?
Yeah, anybody who's interested in crafting, crafting.dev, crafting.dev, you can reach out on our website, or honestly, hit me up on LinkedIn. I chat with pretty much everybody who reaches out, and I'm always happy to especially talk to potential customers. But if you're an aspiring founder, somebody else as well, always happy to share what I've got.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, Sumeet.
Thanks so much, Anthony. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Alldus podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and any Android podcast of choice. You can also head over to our website, www.alldus.com, to listen to more podcasts, view our open roles, and stay up to date with industry news. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for more great episodes coming very soon.